Our show wouldn't exist without you listening. But if you want more information on how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or just to stay in touch, go to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there. To Flipping the Lid, you always know what we do here. We jump in deep, we get real, we get raw, we get to the truth, and we talk about a lot of stories and things about the human experience that we all understand, we all go through, but doesn't actually get talked about a whole lot, right? We know social media is oftentimes just a social media success reel. It's the highlight reel. It's what people can control and want you to see. But what we also know is that there is no such thing as an overnight success. And when I have the opportunity to sit with individuals who are willing to go there, who are willing to talk about the tough times, willing to talk about those dark moments and use it all through the lens of teaching you, I can't wait to get him in this chair. Today, we have somebody that I was blown away by in our very first interaction. It's one of those vibration and frequencies that the second we met, we knew that we were going to do something together. I think we're still exploring what that'll look like, but this man is a husband and a father first. Absolute clarity on that. But he's a world leader. And the perspective shifts that he's changing, his focus on bringing up the next generation of men to really be able to understand what healthy masculinity can look like and where and how we're growing, he's having impact in a measure that many people can only imagine. Spoken to over 500,000 people through TEDx talks and across the globe. But again, it always comes back to he's a husband and father first. Matt, I'm so excited to have you here today, brother.
Man, honor is mine. And I very much appreciate the kind words in the intro. I very much appreciate the reiteration that it's husband and father first, because that's my heart right there, man. And you couldn't have put it any better. So thank you. Honored.
Well, bro, that was the very first thing you and I connected on. I mean, that like legitimately, no questions asked. We were introduced and it was like, that was one of the first things that came up. And I said to you then that that's the only thing binary in my world. And you were like right on top of that. You're like, yep, bro, this is it. And it's been cool too to witness you from afar, because you did a post not long ago that resonated with me more than you know. And it's crossed my mind a handful of times. And it was your dad flex, right? You post pictures with your kids where they're cuddling with you or holding your hands, and right, like you bring in the world into those intimate, special moments that we cherish, that we all seek and desire, that we know are fleeting and we hope are going to last. But you brought it in not just from the lens of like, this is what I'm doing as a father. It's I'm flexing because my kids still want to hold my hands. And that resonated with me deeply, because my son, especially, who's on the spectrum, right? He's 9, and the older he's getting, the less he wants to hold my hand. But man, we were at a place not long ago. It was like just a week ago. He walks up and through a crowded environment, tons of people, he just like ran up and grabbed my hand and happily swung, holding my hand as long as he wanted to with all those people around. And it was literally in that moment that I'm like, I'm doing something right.
Boom.
And you model that. I think it's a really impressive thing. So what is it? What does a dad flex mean to you?
Brother, it is the opposite of how I felt as a child. So I'm going to go straight there.
Go right there, bro. Go. Yeah.
That's the reality of it, and that's why those moments mean so much to me, man. So Rudyard Kipling has this great quote. He says, beware of over concern for money or position or glory. Someday you're going to meet a man who cares for none of those things, and you will realize how poor you are. Right? So yeah. It is that, man, like the fact that, when we sit down next to my young heroes, and it doesn't matter, I've got a 12, a 10, and a 7, and that they will reach out and just instinctually, oh, dad's right there. Boom. Let's grab his hand. And that's the comfortable thing for them. Man, we should all be so lucky as for that, right? And for me, it was the exact opposite. I remember I was the oldest of 4, but really the oldest of 3. I'm the oldest of 4, but there was 3 of us growing up in the house at the same time together. And, we'd hear dad was going to be working overtime and wasn't coming home, and we'd go celebrate in the back room. Like, we're safe.
Yeah.
Right. I want them to see me walk into a room and go, we're safe. That's the difference. So that's why, that's the dad flex for me, man. It's like, hey, I'm not forcing this. This is what they is. Hey, we have this, and nothing else you have to offer me, man, woman, organization, stat, like nothing else you have to offer me touches this, period.
I was going to ask you a different question, which is the only question I ask everybody, but I'm going to have to delay it for a second, because you just hit on something again. We're going deep, and we're going deep fast. This is going to be amazing. Safety, brother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've heard me speak in your community, and our listeners know that I dealt with shame. I dealt with anger, right? I definitely was the screamer. I was the yeller. I like to say that my wife and I have been together for 17 years. We hid from each other for 14, and she's only felt emotionally safe with me for 12 to 18 months.
It is.
I never appreciated or understood the value in particular of emotional safety. Right. I always viewed myself as a man through the lens of a physical protector, right? Someone who's a lover, a leader, and someone who ultimately I always wanted to be the provider for my family as well. But emotional safety wasn't something that I understood, experienced myself in my life. But our therapist, the reason that word jumped at me, our marriage counselor, when we first started going way back when, she always used to just use that to ground me and center me is, does Ashley feel safe right now? Right? Like in any time that we're starting to argue or bicker or whatever, like really focus on her safety first. Where did this concept of I'm safe actually come from? Because when you talk about your dad and it's that moment of like, okay, we're safe. Like what did safety mean for you then? How were you experiencing it? And how did you use those lessons to ensure that you are going to be viewed as a lens of safety, protection and safety for your kids holistically?
Man, it's a really good question. It's a couple of questions that are in there. You know, what did safety mean for us then? And I don't know that I've ever been asked. I'm almost positive I've never actually been asked the question in that way. What I can tell you was I felt safe to be who I could be, wanted to be, to explore, to be curious. I was always very naturally curious. I was always looking for patterns. I was always looking for ways to serve. That's been my DNA forever. And I've always felt very comfortable doing that in almost any room. And to give, a glimpse of that, one of the best compliments I think I've ever received, I actually was interviewing for one of my first teaching. It might have been my first it was my first teaching job. And the person that I interviewed with said, man, I just get the feeling that you can get along with infants, in-laws, or inmates. And I went, I like that because I can, and I have. I grew up in this environment in this place in California where we had a very unique demographic. I had friends who, I was the stereotypical middle class, but I had friends who were the kids of multimillionaire, some relatively famous people. And then I had friends, the first friend that I had who went to jail for murder was when we were in 8th grade. Right. So I had that first one. So I had that entire spectrum that I grew up with, and I got along with all of them because for, a million different reasons. Right. So I felt safe being who I was in all those different environments. And it was when my father was around, it was the one time that I didn't feel like I had that. It was like, okay, I now have actually got to put myself in front of the train because I've got little siblings here.
Yeah.
We know the freight train's coming. My job is as soon as he comes through the door, I need to assess. I need to take a look at his face and I need to figure it out quickly. Yeah. What kind of mood is he in? What's going on? What's happening right here? How do I jump in and try to provide something that either lessens his stress level or gets him really happy at something I did or gets him mad at me so that he doesn't turn to them, right? I'm figuring this stuff out right away. So, so safety for me really became anytime it wasn't that, right? Which is weird, which is crazy, which is sad, which is awful to say, but that's the reality. And again, I don't want to paint the pit. My dad has his own demons, and I legitimately wish nothing but the best for the man. Yeah. I mean, I realized he was going through so much himself, and I fully understand that now as a man myself. But so that's what it looked like there. So, in terms of being the father, kind of to bring it full circle, I'm so grateful for that experience because it has done the proverbial, I know what not to do, and I'm going to go the other way. How do I make it to where it's like, when they're excited about something, they want to come to dad. When they're upset about something, they want to come to dad. When they've made a mistake, they want to come to dad.
Yeah.
There is no time when they're like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and skirt around. Nope. They're like, Dad, no matter what.
That's amazing.
The opposite of what I had.
I want to thank you for really getting as detailed as you did about your ability to read the environment, because there's so many people who grow up in environments like that maybe are toxic, maybe are abusive, maybe has an alcoholic parent, right? And so many people start learning to make themselves small in that period of their life because it means less pain for them, right? I can either get small, or like you, who became the protector, like my dad was. He was the oldest of 5 with an abusive alcoholic dad, right? Like, he became the protector for everyone else. And that was the role that you assumed because you loved them and wanted to care for them. But that's also a responsibility and a weight you had to carry. Yeah. It wasn't something that allowed you to be a kid in all the same ways as well. Caused you to grow up, causes you to armor, causes to protect. But the treasure in all that trash is the fact that you also have a really innate ability to read people, to understand energy, situational awareness, like what does safety actually mean, and how to become that protector and connector in spaces. So the level at which you described it, I really wanted to honor, because many people talk about, I would kind of avoid my dad, or I'd protect my siblings. Like, you got really graphic, and I would be reading the energy. I'd understand which way I needed to pivot. How was I going to choose in this moment? Like, which is the moment by moment processing we all experience. So thank you for that. Yeah. I want to pivot to the question that I really ask. It's the only question I ask every guest. Yeah. Because I introduce people based on how I see them and whatever limited exposure I have, even to bios or who they are. But I always like to ask everyone, who are you in your own words?
I am an educator. So in my own words, I am an educator. When I say educator, I need to, Socrates says the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. So when I say educator, people are going to hear their version of it. My version of educator is vastly different than a teacher. My version of educator is part Morpheus, right? Where I want to tell stories and try to get people to see some things they've never seen. It's part Tyler Durden, where it's like, I want to just, kind of shake people to the core, and they're either going to like it or they're not. It is very much the forever curious human being who is genuinely curious about the people in the world around him. And really, I think at the core of everything, it's somebody who obsesses. I pay attention so hardcore to the things and the people that I care about and love about, to almost an obsessive nature, so that I can attempt to serve them at a higher level and see the patterns that are there, so that I can observe it. And so, what I mean by that is, like, my wife, will be in a situation where nothing's going on. Nobody's saying anything. Maybe she's reading a book, and, the kids are playing, and I've been working, and, maybe coming from the farm or whatever. And then there's a song comes on. And just because this song came on and the kids are playing over here and whatever, I go, oh, she's going to automatically think about this, and she's going to ask me about this. And I'll turn and go, hey, so yeah, the answer to your question, right before she even asks it. And she's like, hey, I hate that you do that. But I'm like, no, I know that's where your mind went because of all of these inputs right now. I want to always be able to do that. And that's probably annoying that I attack it that way. I can see that being annoying, but it's all out of I want to serve her at the highest level I can serve her. And was talking to actually one of our, one of the men from the men's program earlier today too. And I know him well enough now, same thing, as he starts to talk to me and he's asking a series of questions. I wrote down something on a piece of paper because I knew he was going to ask me a specific question. I could tell just by watching the patterns. And so he finally goes, all right, so here's really why I wanted to talk. I've got a very specific question. And I was like, okay. And I was like, go ahead and ask the question. And he asks it. And I picked up the piece of paper and held it up that had a very specific answer. And he's like, how the hell? I'm like, dude, I just obsessively pay attention. Yeah. So that's probably a whole lot more about me than you wanted to hear, but that's it.
No, I think it's beautiful. You've referenced this concept of patterns more than once. And I often describe, like, people are like, how do you read people so well? How do I feel like you're speaking right to me? And the reality of it is like human behavior, micro expressions, energy, all of it is pattern recognition.
Yes, sir.
Right. And the reality of it is we get to a point where we start to recognize it and we're not even conscious to the fact that we know what that pattern's interpreting or telling us. Right. And it happens almost just instantaneously, but it almost gives you in some ways an intuitive and premonition type ability when you can meet someone where they are so presently, because most people don't understand that. So I'd love to understand, when did you become aware at your ability to recognize and use patterns to your advantage?
When I was 4.
When you were 4?
I was 4.
Tell me about that experience.
Yeah. So I believe, there is, I don't know enough of the nature versus nurture, component of this. So I only speak from my own perspective on it, but I believe it was probably both. There was probably some that was born out of that natural protective instinct, at home, whatever that looked like. But I remember 4 years old, that's when I started kindergarten. So I'm a November baby, started kindergarten early, and went into school. And I remember being placed at a table, and they said, okay, we're going to go into reading groups, but we're going to split you guys up into some specific reading groups. And so they sat us at a table, and I remember very specifically being in the red group. And I don't remember what other colors were laid out, but there was a handful of other, I can still see this, and there's a handful of other tables in the room. And as we're sitting there waiting for the next instructions, I remember looking around going, okay, well, that group over there, I already know these kids well enough. Like, those are the guys that are struggling. I don't think any of them can read, actually. Those guys over there struggle with reading, but they're better than these guys. Those guys are a little better than those guys. And this is the table, like, everybody at this table I know can read. So there's something going on here. There's some sort of game that's being played, right? That's not accidental. They're doing that on purpose. I remember picking that up at 4 years old. And so I continued to watch patterns that entire year as a kindergartner. And I remember, again, coming to a very clear conclusion when I was 7. I've got this school game figured out. I will get straight A's for the rest of my life, and teachers will all love me. And I'm not going to have to work at it because I just know how to play the game. I already have this whole thing figured out. And by the way, I never got anything less than an A throughout high school and college. Not because I'm wildly intelligent. I'm not dumb, but I'm not wildly intelligent. But I figured out how to play the game of school very well without trying. So I was 4.
I think that's an unbelievable gift to be able to recognize you have it for, right? I also remember very early situations where I started to recognize patterns, but I can't tell you that I was as decisive in understanding like how I was going to use it that early. And so I think that's a really, really beautiful just gift that you even gave. So you talk about some of the toxicity, some of the places that you need to feel safe. You're growing at age 4. You already figured out the school game, right? So you were understanding how to navigate and move through the world. I'm curious, what did your adolescent years look like as you continued to grow and you started to shift through puberty and become a man yourself? What did that look like in your home, and how did you navigate those teenage and early 20s for yourself?
Yeah,
given where you came from and the role that you clearly put yourself into.
Yeah, that's a great question too. Because I had the school game really kind of figured out and I was getting the straight A's, because I had the role at home really didn't change. I mean, I kept that role, and I don't know that I would go back and do the same thing, because in a way, some of that element of protection, I'm not sure that it really served my brother and sister well at the time. Looking back now, I almost wish I hadn't done it as much.
Yeah.
I feel like I handicapped both of them in a way, potentially. So that's part, but I didn't realize that until later. I mean, I really didn't. At that point, I'm like, I'm just going to continue this role of like, hey, Dad, do I need to be a jester, or do I need to be like, what do you need today? So I'll just keep that role going. So that didn't really change much in the house. But I started looking for, ways to kind of experience something else, I guess. So I turned my attention to different games, like a lot of young men do, girls and sports.
Yeah.
That's what adolescence was. The straight A's were easy. The family life wasn't changing. So it was girls and sports. I mean, that's really what it was. And I got I was a very good athlete, and was good at sports and kept getting better at sports. But I was very good at girls. And when I say good at girls, it means I was good at getting girls. I wasn't good at being nice to girls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pattern recognition, right? I mean, I think when you understand the game, I think that's where, sales, persuasion, influence, ability to kind of, mask even in some situations. And where that can be dangerous is when it's used for a malintent. But which you weren't. And that's...
Oh, I was.
You were?
I mean,
you were. Okay.
It wasn't malintent like I wanted to harm them, but I was a douchebag, and I was just like...
Yeah. Totally get that. And I fully receive that. I accept that. That's 1,000%.
Right.
You recognized that, though, and you were even aware that there was moments that you were doing that. You were using it to your advantage.
For sure.
And so I think it's really interesting. You come from a place where at home, you're the protector. You're there in a position. And while you were talking, I actually pulled something up because I really wanted to show you something. And as I did it, it disappeared on me. So I'm trying to see if I can pull this back out to show it to you. There is this idea of protection that you so well articulated. And I'm not going to be able to show you the image, so I'm going to just make it up and talk about it for now. Okay. But I am a big believer that whenever we protect ourselves, we actually are disconnecting ourselves. The concept that I teach. You remember the trash bag I had people hold up, and the visual that we gave to that. But what I also talk about when I'm in a context of understanding people and this concept of protector and connector is where and how our protecting other people can actually disconnect them as well. Right? Because what happens when you overprotect people, right? Siblings that you're trying to protect, or kids that you don't want to get hurt, or whatever, you ultimately are putting them in that same level of putting them behind that proverbial armor where they're immediately disconnected from being seen, understood, and connected.
That's right.
And then there becomes 2 layers of armor because they get resentful and frustrated in you when all you were intending to do was to help them and protect them. Yet you also now can see, well, okay, overprotecting meant that maybe they were a little not as prepared as they could have been, and they may have viewed you in a totally different lens. When did you become aware of that shift in your awareness about the concept of potential overprotection in situations?
Yeah, I don't, that wasn't something that I got until I really got further into education. So I didn't really take a look and reflect on, even the childhood component of that, and kind of what I thought was maybe a hindrance and a handicap to my siblings. I didn't think about that, honestly, until I started working with what I deemed to be more overprotective parents as an educator, as a career educator. That's when I was like, ooh, okay, well, I don't want to do that with my kids. And wait a second. Oh, shoot, I kind of did that with Jeremy. I kind of did that with Courtney. Oh, I kind of, like it was then that I realized that. But I love what you're talking about here and that disconnect, because I fully had to come to grips with that earlier, that I had disconnected from myself in order to play all of these games too. Because, again, I graduated 22, turned down a job at the White House, and went, okay, wait a second. I'm a straight A guy. Even better at sports now that I'm 22. I'm even better at girls now that I'm 22 and in the best shape of my life. Like, no problem. Hey, you've got nothing to offer the world. Now what? What are you going to do? You've got nothing. You don't know who you are.
Bingo.
And I didn't.
While we wrapped that part of it, I actually did find this. So look, I wanted to show this to you. So I don't know if you can see it on my main screen here. No. But for those of you that have video access to this is a concept that we teach. There's more that supports this. But literally, when we protect ourselves and we put that proverbial arm up, we disconnect ourselves from the 3 people right next to us. If we look at that top line, that middle one is the example of where you overprotected siblings, right? You wrapped them up to separate against that 4th party, which in this case was your dad. And ultimately, they disconnected from your dad, but also from you, and probably from each other in certain ways, right?
So interesting.
The concept at the bottom is the protector and connector, when we have the ability to lower our own armor and wrap that protection around every environment that we're in.
So good.
And that's how I view you today, right? I view you today as that proverbial protector in the spaces that I've witnessed. And it's been beautiful to watch. You've talked about this growth in losing yourself, right? I was 27 when I realized I'd lost myself, right? Yes. It took me a little longer than you. But again, I didn't know my pattern recognition ability at age 4 either. So, I think you're definitely setting a standard on certain things. It's cool. when you realized that you really didn't know who you were, what happened then?
So, very grateful. The pattern recognition, looking backwards, I'm very grateful to a lot of people who poured in and gave me lessons of, consistency and lessons of character and morality and the values and some of the things that I wasn't for sure living, but I had been exposed to those. And a lot of those, a lot of it was through sports. A lot of it was, the coaches that I'd had, and specifically in martial arts and in kickboxing. And so I didn't know who I was or what I was going to do, but I knew whatever I was going to do, I needed to do it to the best of my ability. I needed to start doing something. And so that's really what it was. I turned around and looked and was like, okay, well, Coach Z and Coach Frank and those guys would have just said, man, you better get out there and just play as hard as you can play. So I'm going to put something in front of me. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to go be the best, whatever it is that I could possibly be. And that was before social media, and it was before the whole like do hard things, bro, and like no days off, bro, and like no, like it was before any of that was like a popular cliche and a bunch of memes. It was just like, you know what, dude, you've wasted a lot of time. You got your A's, but you don't know anything about yourself. Time to learn, and you're going to learn by just going to work and work as hard as you can. Like, let's see what happens, because you don't have another option.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go move back in. I had enough pride to go, whether it was pride, whether it was ego, was probably both.
Either way, pride and ego are armor in a protectionary state anyway. So call it what it is. Like 100%. You didn't want to go home. You didn't feel safe there.
And I hadn't been home since I was 17. There was no way I was going to do it. I was going to.
By the way, I never went back after 18 either. I was like, I'm never going home. And I adore my parents too. So it's not that they were all bad, but I was the exact same way. I was like, fuck no, I'm not going back.
I'm not going home. No, I'm going to figure this out, man. Yeah. I'm going to figure this out. There was a part of me that knew that was the best thing for me too. So I just, got the first job that I could find right after that, after turning down that White House gig, and did the best I could at that ridiculous job. But now I look back at it, dude, it was the launching point for everything in my life. Now the job itself has nothing to do with what I do now, but it was the launching point for so much for me.
What was the job?
I was running Abercrombie and Fitch stores.
Okay. By the way, why the hesitation in admitting that? Come on.
Yeah, and I make light of it, and I make a joke because everybody's got their feelings on Abercrombie and Fitch now. Man, I'm so grateful, and I'm excited about the whole thing. It's just funny to say because
it is, especially with guys and gals from our era, because I think just Abercrombie, even when it was at its heyday, was when we were in our younger ages, and we all know what's come out as a result of that. So were you the one that was deciding who was going to be hired and not hired because of attractiveness levels?
100%, dude. 100%. And that, by the way, that came from the top. It was like, no, this is how you do it, right? I mean, that was a real thing where it's like, I'm high, and that was something that I struggled with there too, because I genuinely like people. I always, whether I treated people the right way all the time or not, girls especially, or and I loved to fight. And so I would get myself in aggressive situations as much as I could do it, big swinging pee-pee over here, right? So, but I genuinely liked people. So I would be like, ooh, I want to hire this guy. But, the district manager is like, dude, that guy's a C. And I'm like, why is he a C? Like, dude, look at the pudge around here. Look at this. Like, you just look at him, you don't get the vibe.
Yeah.
Gosh, man. Okay, well, I want to hire A's. It's like.
Deploy pattern recognition.
Dude, yes.
Oh my goodness. All right. So Abercrombie was the foundation for everything you do today. Never expected that to happen. Never thought that we were going to uncover that today. I really didn't I didn't know you were an A&F guy that was just going to go all the way, bro. That's awesome.
And so, it really kicked off, but it kicked off two different, very important things in my life. One, I am married to a woman that I've been together with for 18 years, and guess where we met?
Yeah.
Right? So that's one thing right there. I still have dear friends that I met with, or that I met and worked with there. So, relationship wise, obviously never would have met my wife had I not worked there. But then the other part,
I would say that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big material thing from that period of your life.
It really is, right? Like that's not a bad thing to get out of it. But two, it was that concept that I had gone in, and I graduated. I turned down the job at the White House. So I graduated, didn't have a job that was outside of I was managing an apartment complex. I was working part-time at a bank, and I was working part-time at a bar. And then fighting on the side for, $100 here and there. Right. So like, those are the things I was doing to make money. So I didn't have a job, like a real job. And now I had turned down something that I thought was going to be my career. So I'm like, walking through a mall, and it was the old like, hey man, have you ever thought about working at Abercrombie? As I'm walking through, and this girl's like, have you ever thought about working here? And she's cute. And I'm like, no. She's like, do you have a degree? I'm like, yeah, I literally just graduated. And she's like, well, you can be a manager. And I'm like, all right, this is going to be it then. I'm going to be the best Abercrombie manager they have ever freaking seen, right? So, but by putting the head down and doing the work, I ended up serving somebody at one point that I had no idea who the man was. It ended up being Mark Mastroff, who is the founder of 24 Hour Fitness, partial owner of the Sacramento Kings, billionaire. And he's like, hey man, I really like you. You need to come work for me. And so again, doing the best I could at this job. Well, now all of a sudden I'm in a different situation, right? So that pattern recognition of like, wait a second, like I can actually make a difference no matter where I'm at by being the best possible version of me. Okay, there's something to that, right? So I learned that early there too.
That's a really powerful statement, though. I mean, I appreciate that you can really also even joke about what that experience brought you and what it was, and that's all real.
Yes.
What you're doing today is worlds apart from that.
Yes, sir.
And, I'm not even going to attempt to fully describe it. I want you to, but it's been really cool from afar to be able to see what Apogee is, what it's becoming, and the influence that you have. So I'd like to start there. Really, just can you describe what is Apogee and why? Why Apogee?
So, when you asked me to describe myself in my own words, I said I'm an educator, and I differentiate that from being a teacher. And there's a lot of good human beings who are teachers, and I'm a huge supporter, huge fan of all of them. But to me, a teacher is somebody that goes, okay, somebody else tells me what I'm supposed to tell somebody else. Like, you tell me this, great, got it. I will go tell that person, right? I am going to teach them, and I'm going to make them do this. To me, an educator is somebody that goes, okay, how do I unlock what is inevitably right here? And that person doesn't even know what it is. How do I ask the right questions? How do I continuously inspire this person? How do I lead them by example? How do I get them to see the amazing human being that they have come out as, right? Like, how do I get back to those factory settings? And it's usually more about pulling off garbage than it is adding something else to their plate, right? So that's what an educator is. So I say that to say Apogee is education for young men.
Okay.
Right. So I want to make sure I'm defining the terms with that. So Apogee is education for young men. We are working with young men from around the world, and young men, the youngest we have in there is right about 12-ish. The oldest is right about 18-ish. And I'm talking about specifically, obviously, our young men's program. We've got our men's program. We're launching the women. We got all these other things that we're doing. But 12 to 18-ish young men around the world. And we are spending a year with these young men. And it has to be, most of it has to be virtual. We'll have annual events where we come together. We will have, if guys are local, if we can get together, we will do that physically because that's so important.
Yeah.
But these young men go through a year of self-discovery through educational projects, educational challenges, very specific readings. We'll give them some workouts to get into while they're in it as well. But they're all on a private platform that their parents can see everything that's there. The parents are in there to see everything, so nothing's hidden. But it's this private platform too, where I'm talking to them every single day. I've got other mentors that are talking to them. And then every single week, I will bring in a guest mentor, amazing human beings, one being Brian Bogert, right? Like, bring these guys in, and we sit down and we have a conversation with the young men to really, it's like church for the week, right? We're inspiring them for that week, where it's like, okay, here is this amazing human. Listen to a little bit of the stories, and then you engage, you have a conversation. And then at the end, we're going to debrief, and we're going to go, okay, how does what Brian just said, how is that the same, or how is it different from what Andy Frisella just said? And then a week before, we had Frank Grillo on, and how is it different than what Frank said? And then next week you have Nick Bear, and what is Nick saying? And then what does Mark Bell say? Brian Callen. And we're just literally putting the best of the best of the best humans in front of them so that they can start their own pattern recognition to go, okay, well, what does it mean to be a strong man, character-driven man, values-driven man, show up to serve other people? How do I follow this roadmap in a way that unlocks an awareness of myself so that I can go create a roadmap now that looks like my factory settings, right?
Yeah.
That's what Apogee is.
So what's interesting is all of what you just said gives so much clarity to Apogee, but I have to say from personal experience, none of those words do justice to the energy and connection that exists in that room that speaks and stands on its own. Those young men, I truly are some of the deepest, wisest, most curious young people I have come across in general.
Yes, sir.
I speak to people weekly, multiple times a week. I'm in front of groups of people speaking, right? And you get a handful of questions, right? You get off a big stage, you'll get a line of people. But the fact that those young men, 12 to 18, the level of engagement they had, in fact, you and I were supposed to record the podcast after I came and spoke to your group, and we ended up strapping it because we went 45 minutes longer with the young men because of the level at which they engaged. I mean, there was probably 15 to 18 of them that were like, I've got questions. Help coach me right now. Blown away by that. What are the greatest tools that you used based on your experience to be able to facilitate an experience and bring out that curiosity, that power, that potential at scale like you are?
Thank you for that. Yeah, they are phenomenal young men. And I attribute that to many things. Part of it is, it's what we're doing is a huge help. They obviously have amazing parents at home. We're very specific with the parents. Like, we're going to be talking about growth nonstop. Hey, parents, can I help you talk about that as well? Where are you at? Where, right? And that's part of the reason we launched the men's program, and we got the women's program coming too. It's the, if we're talking growth all day and then they're being exposed to every other avenue that doesn't talk about that, like eventually we lose, or eventually the young hero loses, So making sure that the parents are supported in that is a huge part of that component too. One of the things we were talking about earlier is that safety piece. We've got a code that we live by, and that safety piece, they understand that this isn't school. So I'm not here to dangle a weird carrot in front of them and say, obey, obey, obey. They understand that I actually don't have anything that I can gain from them, and I'm not trying to gain anything from them, right? I'm genuinely here.
You want for them, not from them.
I want for them. My life doesn't change no matter what they do. Like, other than the fact that the reality is I get blessed every time these guys are doing their stuff. But they understand that. They understand that they have the ability, just like my own kids do, to call me out if I'm not living by the code, right? There's a trust that's built in there where they know I will never be hypocritical. And if they even sense anything in there or something looks like it is, they know not only do they have the permission, they have the duty to call me out on that. And that I will go, you're right. And I will change. Right. So there's a trust that's built there. They know it's not me doing something to them. It's me walking side by side with them as we conquer. Right. They have that. They've got that there. And then we're talking about hero stories together. We're just continuously fostering that curiosity of hero stories. It's very trendy for young guys, now to just play a victim role. To just think things aren't that cool, or to just not put in effort, or to see how loud you can, cry or complain. And that's the trendy thing. We want to put hero stories back to being trendy. We want to, put back on a pedestal the stories of people who do serve other humans, who do want the best for other people, who are going to push themselves. It's that old hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. We do all that side by side. I'm not mandating anything. I'm inspiring them to do this with me.
Yeah. Why the particular focus on young men?
Because young men, there's two reasons. One, Frederick Douglass says it's easier to build strong children than it is to fix broken men, right? You and I both know that's true. We work with a lot of men too, and it is a lot of uncovering the garbage. Right?
It almost all is, by the way.
Almost all.
Like
that fact.
They hire me to help them scale their business and don't realize that it's their childhood that we're going to work on, and then their business will scale. Like, yeah,
right?
Always, yeah.
And so logic will tell you that if we can get to the young person and build a strong foundation before the garbage starts coming in, well, then, gosh, we've got a better chance, right? So that's a part of it. I also know that there is an attack, and again, there's a difference between education and schooling. There's an attack in schooling on young men in particular. We cut them off at the knees very early, and then ask them why they can't stand. We go against everything that a young man is again, the factory setting, the way they're designed, the way child development works. We put them in a system very early that goes completely against that. And if they don't quickly obey, then we start to say, well, then we've got to you have a methamphetamine deficiency. That's why you can't pay attention, right? Or we've got to medicate you early and often. We've got to, no walking, no run. Like we're breaking spirits of young men.
Yeah.
Very, very early. So this is in response to both of those.
Yeah. I'm just going to fully own that as I heard you give that last part of the statement, there was a little part of me that like started to get a little protectionary, right? And I'll tell you why. And it's not, I want to be really clear when I say this. I see multiple different perspectives. I have a son, for example, that's on the autism spectrum though. He does have ADHD, right? He does have sensory processing disorder. He has executive functioning issues, impulse control. Like it's a neurological condition that can often come out as bad behavior, but it also manifests as extreme anxiety that even with intentional social emotional structure, emotional safety at home is something that's almost uncontrollable. So my role as my father through the lens of my son, also knowing that medication has been one of the greatest things for him, right? Even the neurofeedback, for example, said that his brain was literally deficient in this one area, which was causing a big issue. So what I'm not hearing you say that medicating kids is bad. I'm hearing that the trend of just having that be the solution to everything is what's a challenge. But I'd love to have clarity because I do think there are situations where medication can be appropriate.
So to make sure I'm as clear as humanly possible, we have a system that is when I'm talking system, I'm saying school systems. We have a school system that is inherently a one size fits all and doesn't match with childhood development and developmental stages, right?
Bingo.
It is built that way on purpose. And I'll go to war with anybody on that. I never go to war against good humans who are teachers and administrators, like whatever, but the system.
No, it's the system. It's the system. I 1,000% agree with you. Completely. There are good people in a bad system. You bet. Some of the best humans, but it's a bad system, and it's a system that is designed to do exactly what it's doing. And it's designed for nothing super solid. And then we take a young man who, again, whether he's got those challenges, whether he doesn't have those challenges, if he does not adhere to our definition of what a young man needs to do so that he can fit in the system, well, then this is one of the first things we are gonna throw in. And I've got a huge problem with that. I also have a huge problem with not working with young people to understand, okay, what is the why? Like why would you not want to figure out why these things are there and what are all of the potential options? And some of that is being jaded too, because I've had a lot of pharmaceutical organizations as clients of mine, as I've spoken around the country, and I've heard less than savory conversations where it's like, there's no curiosity about how to actually help the kid. Right.
It's how many medications can we get?
I 1,000% agree with you. And oh, by the way, just for clarity on our side, we never once and never would ever medicate our kid in any possible way unless it was of interest, intrigue, aware, and he was a part of the active decision to evaluate the positives and negatives of what it could look like, right? Like we've had to help navigate. We've tried things that haven't worked. We've done all those pieces. What I'm hearing you say is that the system is set up in a way that doesn't actually create advocacy for our kids to be who they are and grow and challenge and question the structure of the system. And again, case in point, our kids are not in the traditional schooling system because we found it too rigid for the needs of our children. And in particular, our kid with special needs, because even in that, it's viewed as black and white and you either fit in this box or you don't fit in this box. And you've seen one kid on the spectrum, you've seen one kid on the spectrum. right? So like, that's, I think, the reality. So thank you for bearing with me for clarity on that. I know I
100%.
attached specifically to the medication part, but the clarity on where you went with it from a systematic perspective is the truth. And I don't feel like many parents even know how to advocate for their kids within the traditional system, often of which is the only one they think is available. So how are you supporting parents to understand advocacy and where and how to show up for their kids, and what alternative options exist?
Yeah, and that, I love that question, man, because the definition of advocacy itself is something that we need, because parents do need education on the alternatives. That's part of the way to advocate for your child, is to understand all of the ways you can potentially do that aren't within that system that is breaking down. Yeah. And most, like you said, most parents don't realize there are, not only is there an option outside of it, there are many options outside of it. Many. They don't understand why, many parents don't understand why you'd want to look at an option outside of it too. So I always, I talk about schooling as being the biggest religion in our country. I talk about it as being the biggest cult in our country. And I refer to it like, training elephants. The whole concept of training elephants is like when they're young, you tie them up to a post. They can't pull away from the post physically. They want to, they know they shouldn't be tied up, but they can't do it. Right. And so then when they're older, you can put that same little tiny rope. And even though they're big enough to pull off, they won't, because mentally they're like, oh, we can't. So we've been all trained like that in our school system to go, this is what education looks like. This is how to be educated. This is what you have to do to be quote unquote successful. And then we're going to turn around and start tying our other, our young ones up to that post as early and as often as possible. Birds born in a cage think flying is an illness kind of deal. Yeah. So it always comes back to education for me, meaning I'm going to ask them to walk through, I'll take them through a series of questions to go, is school really right for humans in general? And if you understand what it was designed for, okay, cool. Then what kind of things exist outside of that where you're not having to play this game? There's this kind of alternative school here. Home education actually is pretty easy because you're not repeating this at home. It can look like this. And I want to walk them through options.
I mean, I think that's really what it's all about is, again, it's not about telling people who they should and shouldn't be, what they should and shouldn't do. But again, to me, it's always about how are we evaluating options? How are we seeking perspectives? What are we doing? And I'm a big believer, and I'm someone who went through full blown traditional college. I went through the full schooling system, and I look back on it, I'm like, not once was I taught how to think. Not once was I taught how to feel. Not once was I taught how to executive reason. I was rarely taught opportunities to problem solve, right? I was taught rote memorization to be able to pass tests and to be able to play the game with the relationships. By the way, I played the game in school too, really, really well, because I don't consider myself that smart, but I never cracked a book, and I did pretty damn well because I knew how to show up and do it. But that schooling, I think, often creates a further level of conditioning. It puts another level of judgment and criticism in place. It puts another layer of what's right and wrong in place that starts to dilute people's ability to see who they are clearly. And in many cases, I think schooling also drives people towards the traditional path of just going to get a job and working X number of hours a week and following that traditional model. Even with our children, it's at 8 and 9, we're already starting to break the paradigm for them on that, which is, they've both made comments at points like, yeah, when I'm an adult and I get a job, I'm like, what if you're a business owner? What if you are somebody that's in philanthropy? What does a traditional job mean? What do you actually want to do? Who do you want to be? And your clarity on that is really powerful. And so I want to thank you for that. I'm really curious because I think it's shifted a whole lot. What do you feel, or how would you describe the current societal view surrounding masculinity? And what do you think the predominant societal narratives are that are conditioning our children today that you think could be potentially damaging?
I've got to make sure I step outside of my own intentional, it's not an echo chamber, but it's like I'm intentionally around the people that I want to be around, at this point. And so I come from, I almost take I take it for granted sometimes that my view of masculinity is the same as the majority of my friends' view on masculinity at this point, right? Because we're all like, hey, yeah, if we're not serving and showing up as the best selves and calling each other on each other's BS, say, dude, quit being a jerk, like get out there and do more for somebody else. And hey, also let's check in. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Like we have, like, this is where we're all pushing each other. So I take it for granted that I know that's not the predominant way that society views masculinity. And I don't know if I'm smart enough to know how the majority views it. I will say you do see the fact that anybody will even continuously say toxic masculinity, the fact that that's still a thing.
That it's a term that we even know it exists. Says, yeah.
Right? To me, it shows that there's at least a large population that doesn't understand or that's been jaded to what masculinity should be. And so I think, the things that are the most damaging are, one, the concept of toxic masculinity, because to me, those are oxymorons. If you are toxic, you are inherently unmasculine, because I'm looking at masculinity through that lens of values and traditional characteristics, right? So I do believe we have a subset of the population that looks at masculinity as something that is overly aggressive and overly controlling and overly, oppressive. And I do believe we have a subset that looks at it like that. And I think we also have a subset that either views it as or will try to show it as, kind of the Homer Simpson or the Will Ferrell, kind of goofy, dad bods are cool and just act like a dork and just act, I don't know, man. I think you got all of these different competing narratives, none of which I believe are healthy. None of those are examples that I want to show my own son. I don't want him to think that men are clowns. I don't want him to think that men are these oppressive jerks that will never talk about feelings. I don't want him to think that men are, weak and incapable. I don't want him to think that men are jerks. I don't want him to think men are ignorant. And let's just slam beer and play fantasy sports and live in a I don't want him to think any of those things. All of those things are dangerous.
I appreciate that you brought clarity to even the term of toxic masculinity. And I know that one of the things that you talk about with Apogee is bringing back what you call classic masculinity in the home. Would you mind defining that a little bit further? Just because I'm really curious, what does that mean to you and how is that being shaped?
Yeah. Classic, what I call classic masculinity is really a striving towards, Plato had this concept of the ideals. It was something that he laid out and essentially, I won't do it justice. I'm nowhere near as smart, as articulate as he was, but it was the concept of how do you show up in various scenarios, meaning I'm always Matt, but how I show up as Matt in my friendship with Brian inherently looks different than how I show up as Matt, the husband to Heather, which also inherently looks different than how I show up as Matt, the father to Morgan, which, by the way, is different than the father to Brielle and the father to Loudon.
Yep.
They're all the same, but they're different because each one of those people is different. So I need to show up a slightly different version at different times to be able to serve them and lead them and inspire them to the best of my ability. So to me, the concept of classic masculinity is defining all of the roles that I have the honor of playing in society and going, okay, how can I get to the best possible version of this guy right here so that he can take on as much responsibility as humanly possible to help other humans. And so that means I've got to have my psychology dialed in. I've got to have, or the pursuit of my psychology, my, growing emotionally, growing spiritually, growing in my communication, growing in my understanding of storytelling. It's growth. It's perpetual growth. It's why we called the program Apogee, because it's this pursuit to the apogee of the mountain, right? I always tell people there is no such thing as a perfect anything. I'm never going to be the perfect husband, father, friend, entrepreneur. It's impossible.
Impossible.
But what's not impossible is my pursuit of it, right? Mike Glover said that to me a long time ago, talking about the gentleman that walked in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier. He said their credo is my my standard shall always remain perfection. And I love that. We can't hit it. But if we're growing and we're pursuing it, well then, gosh, we're being educated in all these different areas. And if we're being educated because we're growing, because we're pursuing, and because we're taking on more responsibility to help other people, the further up that mountain we get, the closer we get to what I think a masculine man looks like.
Fair enough. I'm curious in the context of options and spectrum, can a non-masculine man be an option for people to exist in this society? There are people who have more feminine energy, right? Like there are certain men that carry that. Does that go against the context if they are still showing up, serving others, living within the ideals? But is it in a very traditional, even energetic and carrying sense, or is it more about the practicals and standards that I decide to follow?
It's a really good question. And I'm wondering which one, it makes me curious, because I agree. Like there are guys that come across much more with that, what you would consider that masculine energy, and some that come across much more of the feminine energy. Do the guys that have the feminine energy pursue all of those things at the same level on the highest level? I would argue that if they do, then it's fine. And I don't know if I know the answer to that, because I can think of plenty of men who have a softer energy, and maybe what you would call a more feminized energy. And I'm trying to put my finger on whether or not those guys are pursuing those ideals in the same fashion, or if they struggle to pursue those ideals. I would think that the energy itself is relatively irrelevant if the goal is the same.
I would tend to agree with you. I mean, I think that if somebody is consistently seeking to have self-discovery, grow emotionally, in all the ideals that you outlined,
yeah.
The reason I asked the question though is because I can hear that and assume that, to reach that apogee of masculinity means I've got to be a type A alpha male that's commanding the space and the energy, but I'm also pushing and pursuing this. And, in all honesty, I think, I look at it even through the lens of like, I don't even care sexual orientation. Like the reality of it is like masculinity and femininity are more energy states and ideals than they are absolutes. And so that's why I asked the question, because even as I hear it, I'm like, man, to be the more classic man, to hit the apogee, do I have to be that type A male? Now I often am, but right. I have lots of friends who are not. And I think that there's alphas and betas for a reason.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think I'm along the same lines as you. I like the thought exercise on this too. And I think a lot of, so I don't know, do you know who Jack Donovan is?
I don't know the name. No.
So Jack, by all intents and purposes, you look at him and you look at his past, because Jack has done, his words too. Like he's been a knucklehead and done some things that he wishes, but he's glad for the experience, but also, hey, wouldn't do that again. And that was stupid. Right.
Yeah.
So he's got a checkered past a little bit, but a really, really good guy, really good human, by all intents and purposes, a horrifyingly scary looking guy. You're talking like the ultra jacked, like the big eagle tattoo, like, just shaved head, like scary looking dude. And he's homosexual, right? Sexual orientation doesn't
matter. That's why I was asking. That's why I wanted to know the spectrum.
Right. Doesn't matter. And he's one of the foremost experts on tribal masculinity and how tribes have always like The Way of Men is a book that I highly recommend any man to read. Phenomenal book.
Yeah.
So I would tend
The Way of Man is a great book, by the way, around tribal leadership. 11 Rings, Phil Jackson's philosophy. I didn't realize that he grew up in Sioux culture. And so even the way that he conditioned his teams, the early Bulls, the Lakers, was all through the context of Sioux mentality and tribal leadership in the way that he experienced it. So that's another book I want you to read, because that was a really profound shift. I actually read, this was maybe 10 years ago, I read Tim Grover, why is the name blanking from my head? Tim Grover's most popular book. Why am I drawing a blank? Relentless. Okay. So I read Relentless first and 11 Rings right after.
Okay.
Tim Grover and Phil Jackson worked with some of the same players in different eras and different periods. To hear the stories of those same players through a complete different perspective, back to back, was just a fascinating study. So
I will have to dive in, man, because I am I've got, interesting run-ins with Michael Jordan, and I have a very I'm a huge fan of the winning mentality that he brought. Tim Grover, I know. Tim's actually coming to speak to all of our Apogee guys at our live event in December. So I know Tim as well, but I've always been a fan of Phil Jackson. I've never read 11 Rings. So
yeah, 11 Rings it's definitely worth a read.
Cool.
And then, so that anyway, to the whole point of like masculinity, tribal masculinity, all that stuff. Thank you for bearing with me through that conversation as well. Because again, awesome. I look at this as the ability to just have reason, to communicate, to evaluate varying perspectives, to just question and wonder what exists versus having to have absolutes. I think it gives us all so much more freedom. And I think that freedom is what everybody wants, yes. But it's one of the scariest places for most people to be.
Very much so. Very much so. For a number of reasons. I always say freedom is my favorite F word, right? So I love that. And I think it is scary because one, yes, there's the responsibility that comes with it, right? You have to have the responsibility if you want to be free. If you're not free, you are not responsible. And it goes both ways. So you have that. But I think that's also when you really have that freedom, you've got to be open to having your beliefs pushed, challenged, and having to have a discussion. You have to be able to and willing to articulate your point of view, try to be as objective as possible, but genuinely listen to another point of view. And if you are truly free, you have the ability then to change your mind when better evidence is presented. And that's a piece that you don't gain in any other way. Yeah, right? I love this. There's a quote by Orson Scott Card that I love, and he says, "This is how humans are. We question all of our beliefs except for the ones we really believe, and those we never think to question." And I always like that. But the most free humans have the ability to go ahead and steel man their own beliefs and go, where may I be wrong? And if I see better evidence, I'm going to switch.
Well, and the reality of it is I think that also comes back full circle to the concept of presence, because I can only know as much as I know in this current moment, but I could learn something tomorrow or a minute from now that could completely give me a paradigm shift in one of my own belief systems. That's Dude, right. It was only 2.5 years ago that I thought I wasn't an angry person. I almost lost my wife and kids because I was angry. I was blind to it. Like, had you tried to convince me that I was angry, I would have been like, what?
Yeah.
But again, it was one of those things that up until that moment, people look back and they're like, do you regret it? Do you, yeah. Do I wish I could have known earlier? Of course I do, but I didn't. Yeah. So I could blame and shame myself, or I could recognize that I did the best I could in that given moment. And when I learned more, oh, by the way, that's when I learned and shifted, right? Like that's the reality, but we can only do that if we have an open mind.
If we have
an open heart. I think we have to be open to both. And that's how we can allow freedom to flow too. Because if we're closed off on either, we don't get to be free.
That's right. And if we let fear creep in too, because that's where a lot of people don't want the freedom too, is because if they know if they change their mind, what they do is subconsciously they go down the rabbit hole of, okay, if I change my mind on school, let's say school, because we were talking about school. If I change my mind on school and I decide that I'm going to home educate my kids, what is my neighbor going to think? Oh, what if they, what does college look like for that? What are my parents going to think? They're going to think I'm crazy. What about, it's probably better that I just keep them in school. Right?
Yeah.
Hey, guess what? If that's the way your mind is working, you're not free.
I argue that completely. I 1,000% support and give that. You have an incredible mind for recall and for quotes.
Yes.
I have often been fascinated by people's ability to reference so many specific thought, emotional, philosophic, societal leaders, and referencing in many ways universal truth spoken across generations, right? I work with a meditation and consciousness coach for the last 3.5, 4 years, and she's like this. She's studied the I Ching she can reference anything, everybody from any generation. It's unbelievable to me.
No.
When did particular quotes start to really resonate with you?
Yes.
And how have you used quotes to shape your perspective or challenge your perspective over the years?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, and thank you for the compliment in that. Wow, 15. So I have very specific moments, right? So 15 years old, sitting in a movie theater, and it was my first date. So first time I'd ever gone out with a girl. She was 17. I was a sophomore. She was a senior. She's captain of the cheerleading team. I'm like, dude, I am winning this game, right? Like, I am winning the game. The captain of the cheerleading team was with a sophomore, dude, unheard of. I'm breaking, boundaries, breaking barriers.
Have you considered working at Abercrombie and Fitch? Sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
So gross. I'm this 15-year-old, idiot. And I go to the movies on my first date, and we go see a movie called Braveheart. Everybody's heard of Braveheart. People don't know it. And as we're sitting there, the more and more this movie's going on, and then, yes, I get it, man. People hear, oh, that movie's not historically accurate, bro. Like, cool, got it, sweet, don't care. So for the listeners that just automatically went there, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
And so,
which I would say is the case for a lot in life too, by the way, if you apply that same concept. So keep going.
Absolutely is. So, sitting there watching the movie, but I'm really stoked that I'm with this girl. And it did not take long for the movie as it's continuing to go. And I'm like, hold on, what did he just say right there? And I lost interest in the fact that I had this girl right here. Sorry, Andrea, but I did. I lost interest, and I'm just going, oh yeah, yep. Locking that away because I could feel it, like, just, it was raising these emotions in me. And towards the end, when he says every man dies, not every man really lives, I just went, cool. I don't know what this means for me. I have no idea, but I do know that I am not going to just exist on this planet, because he's right. Most men just exist, and there's all these regrets. And I don't know how that looks for me, but it will never be my fate. And so from then on, I was just very conscientious. I started making quote books. So whether I'd hear a quote in a movie, whether I would hear it as a song lyric, or whether I would end up reading it, whatever that was, that has always been my form of journaling. I'm not a big journaler, but I will do that, and I will just kind of extrapolate and go, okay, well, how is that similar to what this guy said? Why do they really have similar worldviews, or is it different? Right. And I'm looking for the patterns.
I deeply appreciate it. I mean, I read, I'm pretty convinced I'm dyslexic at this point. And my memory and recall, I always challenged myself on, because they don't come to me. The quotes don't come to me. But what I've also realized is that's not how I operate. That's not how information flows through me. I also know that it's about my pure surrender in any given moment, that knows that the words that I need will always be there, even if they're not someone else's, right? Even if they don't have the credibility of a Socrates or a Plato or just because of everything that's been recognized. And so I just always admire when people can recall that and recognize the value of it. I literally just earlier on a podcast, I think it was my closing thought, which is funny that you just brought it up based on the line in the Braveheart that landed the most. Yeah. I literally said to somebody just a couple of hours ago, I said, most people live an entire life, but never actually live or feel alive.
Yes.
Right. And I know that firsthand, because I felt like I was living, but not actually alive. I had to push to the limits of death in some cases. My risk tolerance had to be so high for me to feel anything because of everything I had shut off. And, it's difficult sometimes when you are in that protector connector state so early to not shut off to yourself, to not shut off to your own emotions, to not to shut off to all those things. And what it's led me to really wonder with you is you've referenced so many times in the time that I've known you, and in even today's recording. I mean, I stopped counting, but it's probably minimum of 10 times I've heard you say, which is that your whole existence is for serving others. And you have been serving and protecting and connecting others since the beginning, since you were aware that you were starting to do this. I'm curious, who serves you? And when did you learn the importance of serving yourself so that you could serve others?
First one is, I don't know if the first one's easier. Maybe the first one's easier. I have a very, even in this, man, I'm trying to orchestrate this, which is probably to my own demise. But I try to orchestrate who is serving me in various areas, whether it's people that I go to in certain areas of life, or whether it is the kind of Napoleon Hill's concept of a board of directors, right? Where it's like, I've got kind of this board of mentors in certain areas of my life. And some of those are people that I can actually reach out to and physically call. And I've cultivated a relationship with them where I can be like, hey, on a business sense, hey, Beaudreau, what do you think? Or hey, Alex, Hormozy, what do you like? What do you think about this? Or Seth Godin, right? What do you like? I'll go to Seth or Jeff Sandifer, or I've got people that I can go to in that regard, but many of them are also fictional characters, or they're dead, or they're people. I mean, I have that, right? So I feel taken care of by a lot of those people. But what I've learned is that I always feel the most taken care of when I've taken care of other people. Right? When I go upstairs and I, when I go do something for Heather, or I go do something for the kids and they're excited and they're at peace, and I just see the byproduct of all that is their joy and they're in peace. Nothing else makes me feel as good as that. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if that's just how I'm wired. But nothing makes me feel as good as that. I'm the most taken care of when I take care of others.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the definition of a true servant's heart in so many ways. I think what's really interesting is so many people fall into that pattern, but they do it at the expense or detriment of themselves. Mm. And I don't believe that that's what I witness with you, at least in the state of your life. So I'm curious, have you ever served or cared for at the expense of yourself in your life? And what did it look like in those times?
Yeah, I appreciate that question too, because that was something that I definitely had to learn. And I've learned it over I've had the honor of serving so many young people and parents over the last almost 2 decades at this point, right? So I've literally worked with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of families to have worked through all of this. But when I want to serve somebody and I find that I want something for them more than they want it for themselves, that for me was extraordinarily difficult to get past. And I don't know. That. Yeah, and I know you do, because you serve so many and you help so many people.
That's a hard thing to get over, because it really is. You got to detach from that. That's so hard.
And it's that, right? It's the understanding of how to detach from that. And in full transparency, I do still have, I have to actively detach from that sometimes at this point too, right? It's not it's not something it's natural more than it ever was, but I still sometimes have to be like, oh my God, hold on, man.
Yeah.
I know what to do, right? I still have to catch myself and do that, because I want it so badly. And one of the things that really helped me realize, and again, whether listeners are, as far as their own spiritual journey, whether they believe in any spiritual book or not, or any specific religion or not, is not my point. The point is, I'm going to use this story as an example of how I helped get through it, right? So, I look at, you got the Israelites who were in slavery in Egypt, and they're taken out of slavery. They're given this leader in Moses, and they're taken out of slavery. And God himself is with them the entire time. And it's not too long after they get pulled out of slavery that they're like, gosh, God, you're a little bit loud right now. Can you stop talking directly to us? And also, this guy that you gave us, we think we're going to go ahead and kill him. We're going to go ahead and get this golden cow, and we're going to put it right here, because it would have been so much better if you had just left us where we were, because this is a hard thing, right? So I'd use that story to go, wait a second. All right. So God himself is getting disrespected by people as he's trying to help them. Who's Matt Beaudreau? Who cares who Matt Beaudreau is? Of course there's going to be people that are like, hey man, I don't actually want to grow. Of course there are. And hey, by the way, some of them might be like, and this is kind of your fault that I'm over here now, because I believed you and I started to grow, but now this sucks.
Yeah. And then they start gaslighting you, huh? Yeah.
Of course. So of course, who am I? I'm nobody. So of course they're going to do that. Right. And
doesn't your shirt say I am legend though? I mean, you're more than a nobody.
Yeah. Shout out to Kevin Boyce. This is his stuff right there. Yeah, man. So, that was one of the things that helped me kind of on the tipping point to be able to go, okay, man, look, I'm going to keep building the ark. I'm going to invite as many people on board as that want to come. And at some point, if it starts flooding, it wasn't my fault that they drowned, because I invited them to come. And once I wrap my mind around that, it's easier now, but I still have to work on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when you're a servant, when you really want to help and impact people, and when you can see their potential in a way that they can't, right. It's like you almost wish you could give them a vision into the future that you and I see, right? Mm-hmm. And be able to help give them the guidance and the permission to do so. But at the same time, we can't, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the really difficult part. But thank you for, I appreciate your humility, right? There's been so many situations through this that you're really grounding yourself in so many ways. And I think humility and presence are two things that I associate deeply with you. That's one of the reasons you're so able to create the level of impact that you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, man, I definitely appreciate it. I'm curious, what's the trash from your past that you're still working through?
The biggest thing that comes up for me, man, is my initial default setting. As much as I knew I didn't want to be my father, I knew that intellectually. And emotionally, I was at that visceral, like, I'm going to go far the other way. There's that old adage of, it's a military concept of you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back to the level of your training.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why they go into having like the sleep deprivation, and you get because that's really going to bring out that lowest level, that low bar. Where are you really?
Yeah.
And so with my first daughter, she had some we found out later was some gut issues and all these things happening. She would go routinely more than 24 hours without sleeping at all as a baby. Routinely would do so, and it wasn't like she was just chilling for 24 hours. She was screaming for 24 hours. She was in pain. She was uncomfortable. Things were not right, and she never slept through the night until she was like 2.5. So while we have that going on at home and she's not sleeping, and then right after she finally started sleeping, we had our second child, who also was not somebody who slept through the night until she was a year and a half, right? So we've got all this going on while financially I'm taking a big risk, leaving a 6-figure administrator position to go take a $31,000 a year position, one income, living in California. Right. So the financial strain and all that. So there was an element of really a couple years where, I did not show up like I've always wanted to show up. I yelled way more than I was, wanted to. I wasn't the husband and the father, that I should be. And look, both of them my daughter is great, happy, healthy, thriving, amazing. My relationship with my wife has never been better. But I still go, frick, man, what could it have been if I hadn't have had to reverse that?
Yeah.
If I had, I popped her on the butt one time when she was when she was like 2, and she started speaking when she was 9 months old, full sentences at a year. So I pop her on the butt when she's 2, man. And she's like, Daddy, you didn't need to hit me. If you had just told me what you wanted, I would have done it.
Oh, dude, that's a soul hit. Dude.
So, right. Does she remember that? No, she doesn't remember it. Do I remember it? Yeah, man, forever. And that's the stuff where I'm like, damn it. So I still struggle with that for sure.
I resonate with that deeply. I was given a gift not long ago, though, and I won't go into too much detail on the story just because I'm going to protect others in the story in this particular case. But that resonates really, really deeply with me. Again, I've talked about it even on this show with you. It's 2.5 years ago is when my wife and I unpacked my anger.
Yeah.
Right. And I look at it and I've got a 9-year-old and my daughter turns 8 this summer. Right. For us, 2.5 years is kind of a blip in the amount of life that we've lived. For them, it's 25 to 30% of their life. Right. And so I look at it and I say, okay, even if I was off for the majority of their life, by the time my daughter was 5, I was already shifting. I'd actually started shifting at probably 3 or 4 her age. My son, that same deal. Well, because of some things that have gone on in our life, it's brought up discussions around anger and frustration and what we're worthy of being how we're worthy of being spoken to, and how to, the types of people that we either do or don't or won't tolerate that from ever, and how to navigate those situations. And, what was really freeing for me is that I think I've still carried some of those same moments, but what both kids reflected back to me is they don't ever remember having an angry dad.
Yeah.
And so what I really want to just say to you, my friend, is I hope you find a place to continue to give yourself grace, because you and I both know there are many men who never wake up.
Right.
There are many men that stay on that same pattern, that wake up 20 years later, isolated and alone. Their wife leaves them. Their kids hate them, right? The reality of it is that you walked the path that you walked because you needed the lessons and the clarity that you have today.
Yeah.
And so what you did then, even that moment, that story, which is so fucking powerful, right? It is heartbreaking, but it's also so heartwarming. It's so lifting, because here's the other side of that. Your daughter at 2 felt enough emotional safety with you to communicate back to you that what you just did wasn't in her best interest. And she learned to advocate for herself at 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you could look at that through an element of shame and blame on what happened in that moment and how much that hurt. Or you can view that as a moment of complete pride and celebration for how strong your daughter is because of the environment you've brought her into.
Totally. Yep. Totally. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
And so that's what I want you to continue to honor, is even what you had referenced early on. It's like, look, we all have the chance to learn. We all have the chance to change.
Totally.
And the fact that you continue to see patterns, you continue to refine, and you continue to grow to hit that ideal of what it means for you to be a husband and father is everything.
Totally.
You deserve to celebrate that.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that greatly. Because that is, that's I do believe in that pursuit of perfection, knowing that I'm not going to hit it, and I don't ever expect myself to hit it. It's just when I have the obvious swings and misses that I look at and go, well, that was just a big drop in the character right there. Like, that was just...
Tell me, though, that every one of those weren't some of the most profound lessons and growth moments in your life. And so you can look at it through that lens, or you can realize you had to go through that to become who you are today.
Totally. Yep, totally.
And that's the surrender that we have to get to completely, fully allow that freedom to exist within us. Because otherwise you're trapping yourself in an old self that you can no longer influence.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep. And I know you're right. So yeah, no, thank you for that.
Thank you for letting me reflect that back to you, because you deserve that. And I saw the emotion in your eyes as we were talking about it. So thank you.
Brother. Yeah.
All right. As we're wrapping up here, I would love to make sure that everybody knows how to get in touch with you to see if, how, and when either their young men are an ideal fit for Apogee, if the men's program, the women's program that you're launching are a good fit. I do believe that you are good people, bringing good people together to show them what's possible, and not in a way that you're conditioning, training them to believe a certain way, but to believe in who they are and consistently challenge the narrative to advocate for who they can become. How can they find you? And then could you also leave us with a closing thought from your heart?
Well said, man. Thank you for that. I always ask people to just go ahead and email me directly. And I know that's people have told me that's a dangerous thing doing a podcast. And yeah, it gets me hundreds of emails. But I appreciate that. And I'll get back to everybody. So just email me directly, man, matt@apogeestrong.com. We're redoing apogeestrong.com or apogeestrongprograms.com are great places to go. We're redoing the entire Apogee Strong tech side of things. So all that'll come out here in July of 2023. But people can just email me directly, man, matt@apogeestrong.com, and I'm glad to help.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Give us a closing thought from your heart, my friend.
One of the things that let's talk about, something I've been kind of ruminating on lately and talking about with the groups of people that I get to serve. And it was a concept by Naval Ravikant. And he says that the majority of the things we really need to learn cannot be taught. They can be learned, but they can't be taught. And I've been ruminating on that for so much. And I think there's so much power and wisdom in there. And I think there's a lot of freedom that's in there if we realize, we just have to go through even what the experience that I just shared with you right there. It wasn't.
You got to swing and miss to be able to learn, right?
Taught. I was going to be, I had already had all the right things taught. I had to experience. I had to experience, and I had to go through it, and I had to allow that to change me on that. So that's what I want to leave everybody with is realize some of the lessons, the best lessons that you're receiving, man. You're not going to be taught those, but you're going to learn them.
Matt, thank you so much for being with us today, my friend. I'm so grateful for you.
Honor was mine. Back at you, brother.
And for all of you that just tuned in and saw this man completely jump into his can, scan it deeply, and pull out the trash so wide open so that we could see it and learn from it, That's how he operates. He operates by living by example. He's setting the standard consistently for who he wants to continue to become while still honoring who he is today. But what we can see as a protector and connector is it can also shut us off. It can also actually disconnect other people. We have to pay attention to the calibration of how we show up to allow people the space objectively and non-judgmentally to evaluate and learn who they are. The reality of it is just like he just said a few minutes ago, we sometimes don't give ourselves the grace, forgiveness, and permission that we even deserve in moments. But if we don't swing and miss, we're never going to learn. And some things just cannot be taught. So tap into the collective wisdom of what Matt just dropped for you. Where and how can you learn and grow from that situation? And more importantly, you got to flip open your lid and scan your can so that you can learn from you.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.